So it's like all these things where it's like, oh, if I hadn't gone out of my way to make this like friendship connection way back in the day, if I hadn't learned all these skills from travel blogging, and then if I hadn't like met this other person, right? So it's like all these little domino effects that you can kind of see the connection. So like an outsider might see it and be like, wow, this job just landed in her lap. But the reality is when you can look back and see like all the connective points, you're like, actually 10 things had to line up before I could get here. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. Like you don't always see those like 10 things that are happening. And maybe you can look back on them, but in the moment, you're not seeing them necessarily, right?
Yeah. Preparation meets opportunity.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
People don't see the preparation, they see the opportunity and they're like, oh, that's how it happened.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Welcome back to What Comes After. I'm your host, Janet Lee. Today's guest went from media agency to becoming a travel blogger and influencer to now juggling both travel blogging business with being a corporate marketer. Sally, welcome. So good to
Thank
have
you.
you.
Thank you.
Super excited to chat today.
Likewise.
I know our podcast is called What Comes After, but I always start from like what came before. And so if you can kind of start even from your childhood, that would be helpful for the audience.
Yeah. My parents are immigrants from Sudan and Egypt. I was born in Ireland, and my family kind of moved around a lot. I think my parents were living in Ireland, obviously, when I was born, but we also lived in the UK for a bit, in Bahrain for a bit, and then eventually made our way to the US. So definitely a bit of a nomad in my earlier years.
I wonder if that's a connection to what you'll be doing later when you kind of headed towards travel blogging.
I definitely think so. I think my parents were very big travelers. And even though it wasn't something I got to do a lot in my childhood when we lived in the US, I definitely do think that travel bug was kind of in me. So it definitely makes sense for my later career choices.
Yeah. And our paths collided at USC. Tell me
Mhm.
about your experience at USC.
It was really great. I loved my time at USC. I think it was a big period of growth for me. And I think USC has also, especially in the business school, is always very big on kind of emphasizing how important it is to understand the global world, right? And so I had a lot of opportunities to do different global projects while I was there. And one of them was Janet. I think really where our friendship flourished was our summer internship in Indonesia. And so that was definitely one of the most life changing experiences, I think, from my time in college.
Yeah, I really wholeheartedly agree. I went to Panama to volunteer and do business consulting. I studied abroad in France. Where did you go?
Yeah, so my freshman year, I actually spent spring break in Shanghai, which is very much not a typical spring break destination. And then I also studied abroad in Ireland. And so I think I'm very grateful that I got to go to USC because of that emphasis on international travel, because I don't know that I would have been able to travel as much during my college years if it weren't for those programs.
Yeah, traveling's expensive, and we were college
It,
students.
yes, yes.
What was it like going back to Ireland? Do you feel like you had remnants of your childhood? Is it something completely net new for you?
Yeah, it's funny, I think because I was there when I was so young that I didn't necessarily have this like deep connection to it. But I did go back and visit the city that I was born in. And I do think that there's just a lot of like cultural similarities, which surprised me between Ireland and I think even the Arab world. Like, I think the people are extremely warm, they're extremely friendly. And I think for me, it did feel a little bit more aligned with the culture that I grew up with. So it was familiar in that sense, I would say.
Yeah.
Also potatoes, because I love potatoes, but like,
Can't forget
who
potatoes.
doesn't?
That's right. Yeah, I do feel like a lot of my kind of curiosity around different cultures, different cuisines come from having been exposed to so many different places growing up. But do you sometimes feel like not necessarily identity crisis, but if you've been in so many different places, mingling with so many different people, do you sometimes wonder what it takes to kind of ground yourself, or have you ever felt that way?
No, I mean, I absolutely did with my parents being from Egypt and Sudan. And as immigrants, I think they felt very strongly that it was super important for us to stay connected to our homeland, right? I think they saw a lot of aspects of American culture as kind of the antithesis of um, what Arab culture what is. So I think for them, there was a lot of times where we would sort of clash a little bit on like the American way or what they perceived as to be, the right way for the culture they grew up in. And so I think that was, definitely a big challenge growing up. I don't know that there's a singular place that I feel 100% at home in it that really aligns to who I am. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's pieces of that in different places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel super similar to what
Yeah.
you're mentioning, so that makes sense. Let's talk about some pivots in your
Okay.
life. Tell me about the transition between graduating and kind of thinking about next steps.
There wasn't a lot, like a really clear path um, for me right after school, but I also wanted to take advantage of that time to do some traveling before I kind of settled into, the real world is sort of what I would tell myself. And so in that time, I did the summer internship in Indonesia through USC, which was amazing. I also spent some time doing a Spanish language intensive in South America. And so after that, I kind of buckled down and told myself I needed to find, a job opportunity. And so eventually I started working at the ad agency and yeah, I think it was good for a while. My main client was a movie studio. And so I thought that I had gotten not my dream job, but definitely I thought I had entered into that direction, if you will, with that career.
Yeah. Sometimes our expectations are different from our reality. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is very much a case of that. So after working at the ad agency for a while, I kind of realized that it wasn't the environment that I wanted to be in. It was very long hours. It was incredibly demanding, not so great pay. And I really just felt like the environment was not suited to me. Like I didn't really thrive well in this like high stress and high demanding environment. And I also knew that, you know, I don't know that I want to live a traditional life. At least, when I was 25, I was like, I don't know that that's for me. Like, I don't know if a 40-hour work week is where I, clock into my desk and commute 2 hours each way is what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm. Was it scary to come to realization?
Yes, I I think I spent a lot of time agonizing over this decision. I cried a lot. Suddenly I was like, wait, this isn't actually what I want. And now what am I supposed to do? And I think that uncertainty was incredibly scary. But I think ultimately I took a leap of faith. And I think that's one thing that I've really learned from that time is just you can have a tentative plan or not, but like things do kind of work out in the way that they're supposed to, at
Mm,
least for me.
yeah.
Ah,
What was that little spark of inspiration to be like, okay, well, I have to explore another route? Have you had
yeah.
options? Have you had options to choose from that you were thinking in your head?
At that time, I had done so much research. Like I read The 4 Hour Work Week, which was probably the first tiny spark of oh, okay, like here's the way. And look, I think The 4 Hour Work Week, I don't know if you've read it yourself, but I think it's definitely a little bit of like an extreme way of thinking about work. And then down the kind of internet rabbit hole I went. And I realized like there's a lot of people out there that are running businesses online, that are working remotely, that are able, because for me, I really wanted to travel. Like, so it wasn't necessarily that I didn't want to work, but I wanted the flexibility to be able to work and still be able to travel when I wanted. Maybe I could do social media marketing. I could do some kind of marketing that I didn't need to be at a desk for, but I knew I wanted to be remote. Like that was really my goal.
Mm. And so, what was that moment like when you first, I don't know, pressed a button on publish or creating an account on your Instagram? What was that feeling like? And what was that moment like?
So it's interesting because I think when I started, my intention was not to be a full time travel content creator, actually. I'm going to write about it in hopes that I can use this as a portfolio for content marketing and to use my social media as maybe a portfolio for social media marketing because I didn't have that experience under my belt. It was more like, all right, I'm going to start building my portfolio and I'm going to start applying for these like remote jobs and I really hope that something works out, right?
That is so brave. Yeah. Um, I'm sure there's a lot of highs that come with entrepreneurship and there's lows. What
hmm
do you think were sacrifices for you at the time?
Um, that's a good question. I think so. I guess to answer what some of the sacrifices were, I guess I would also have to answer some of the support that I had that allowed me to make those sacrifices, right? So I was fortunate in that I was able to live at home. I also didn't have any student loans. And then I think financially was I was like very unstable for a while. So I think it was, like financial sacrifice. I spent a lot of time, like I was working way more than I thought I was working in my 40-hour a week job, which, but it was something I was really excited about. And I was so eager to learn. And I had that itch that like, I didn't feel like work really. It was great.
Yeah. I think when we do things that light up our, soul and it energizes us, I feel like it doesn't feel like work all the time. And maybe that's what you felt. I think working for yourself and kind of building something of your own mattered more than maybe working for an agency at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I imagine maybe you feel, similarly as an entrepreneur, but it is like it's like the best and worst thing, right? I think it's really weighing out those pros and cons, right?
Yeah, definitely. I would love the audience to learn more about what your passport and plates is all about. Can you continue to tell us more?
Yeah. So I started Passport and Plates because I really wanted to connect with other Arab American or Muslim American people, especially women that were doing non traditional jobs, right? Or like pursuing these different opportunities. And I think I also had this huge passion for travel and food. Like, I know everyone says that Anthony Bourdain is their like inspiration, but like, I think there's a reason for that, right? Like, I want to be the like Arab female Anthony Bourdain, right? So that was my inspiration. Part of it was like very much my passion. And then the other part of it was like, I want to find my community because I wasn't very involved in the Arab community. I didn't have a lot of Arab friends. And I think a lot of the examples of what I'd seen were people pursuing these like kind of traditional and not just traditional paths, but like almost like immigrant traditional paths. So like doctors, lawyers, right? And engineers. And even for me being in marketing, that was non considered non-traditional. So
When did you feel like you hit that place of inflection point? When was that moment where you're like, I think this is sustainable in some shape or form?
it was two things that happened. Firstly, I did get my first remote job. This woman had just opened and she had some clients, and I got to do social media and content marketing for her. And that happened around the same time as I got my first like paid project for my blog. Yeah, I think I made like $50, right? But it was still just like, oh my gosh, I made $50 from my travel blog, right? Like I started my blog probably around August 2015. And both of these opportunities came through around February or March 2016. So it really wasn't that long of a period, which was great.
What if it took longer? Do you ever think about that?
Yeah, I think that I probably would have given myself some kind of deadline from a job perspective, right? Because I think that I had never started my travel blog with the intention of it being my full time career, but it really turned into a passion project for me. And I just felt like alive. And so I think for me, I probably would have sustained that much longer. But I think if I hadn't figured out a way to earn money, like, having this like freelance job, that I probably would have hit some point where I'm like, okay, I need to figure out like an answer because I don't want to be right, like broke for a long time.
I mean, fair. Girls gotta
Yeah.
eat.
Yes. For sure.
um, how would you introduce yourself at that time? I'm sure it was definitely a bit of a moment for you to, you know, say it with confidence that now I'm a full time
Yeah.
blank. Tell us more about that.
Really wasn't until a couple of years in where I could confidently say, like, yeah, I'm a travel blogger, right? And I think there also used to be less stigma around the idea of being a content creator. I think at the time it was also very much a career in its infancy. It was really hard to make money because I think that people were like, I'm giving you this like travel opportunity in exchange for you creating the content for me. Right. So it was, I think people were kind of curious about it and less had this like negative perception and that negative connotation to what it is.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure there were a few places around the world that really captured your attention and your heart. Do you keep track?
I think it's in the 40-ish, like the low 40 range, which is, a lot. And I'm super grateful that I've had the opportunity to travel to that many places. Answering, I think my like favorite places, I think is always hard for me because there's so many places that have really special memories for me. And I may be biased, but I love traveling in like the Middle East. I think it's just like it's such a misunderstood destination, or not a singular destination, but region really. And I think for me, what I started to realize is that the more time I spent traveling in places like the Middle East, like Central America, like places I think that people kind of write off because of the way the media portrays them, is I got so excited about doing that because I think that these are the destinations where you really can go in and change the like negative stereotypes that you've been fed over the course of time. And there's something really magical about that. My most joyful moments have come from places like Jordan, like Turkey, like Guatemala, like those are, yeah, those are really the ones that stand out amongst many others.
Oh man, Jordan's on my list, so definitely want to go there.
It's honestly every time when someone says if you have to pick a single favorite, that is actually the one that I say. So 10 out of 10 recommend.
Yeah. And I think when I'm hearing your story, Sally, what's wonderful is you're not just creating content that you enjoy. In some ways, you are educating people about places they would have never considered, in addition to kind of sharing different cultures, different perspectives. And at the end of the day, we're not all that different, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. I think that we are way more similar, like just as humans, than we are different. And I think that is really what people should be gleaning from travel.
People are just people. I think that's
Yeah.
the main
the main
session theme.
takeaway, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, while that's happening in your 20s,
Yes.
we turned 30, pandemic hits. How
Yes.
has that experience been like for you as a content creator?
I mean, obviously, globally interesting time, right? I think for me personally, it was hard because I had been content creating for 5 years And I was getting to a point where I was feeling a bit burnt out by how much traveling I was doing. I was getting to a point as I was approaching 30 in 2020, that I was like, I need to slow down, right? But I didn't know how to, right? It was hard because I think it was like, am I going to turn down opportunities? So I think that's kind of the challenge of entrepreneurship, right? When if you get to a point where you feel like I'm good and can sustain this, but then also there's this worry that if you turn down opportunities, then they won't come your way, right? And so obviously the pandemic really, I mean, it put a huge halt on travel, right? Like no one was going anywhere. And for me, I think I needed that. I really needed something that would force function. And I didn't have a plan. Like I had no plan, right? I had vowed that I wouldn't spend that time just being extremely stressed about the uncertainty because I had to remind myself that one, I need to enjoy this period of slowing down because it's been like kind of by force. Two, I can use this time, yes, to apply for roles, but also let me use this time to actually pursue things that I'm interested in. I was surprised and concerned to find that I didn't miss travel in the same way that I thought I would. And so that's really what led me to what's next, which was a friend of a friend had been working remotely in California. And she was like, hey, what do you do for work? And she was looking for a contractor for like a really short stint on her team, which does marketing for HR. And I kind of told myself, like, yeah, I could do anything for 3 months. And like, whatever, it'll just be like a short gig to keep me busy because it's not like I'm really working, right? And here I am. It's been 5 years. So I didn't expect to like that job. I didn't expect liking 40 hours a week. I didn't expect enjoying working at a corporation, like all these things. And I was very surprised and fortunate that I did. And I think it also really helped that we were all working remotely at that time because I think that was like the easiest way I could have transitioned into the corporate working force again. But if you had asked me in 2019, like, hey, do you think you'll be working a full time role in a year? Absolutely not. And so life's like fun and unpredictable in that sense, right?
And then here you are. I guess it's another rebrand.
I was like, okay, well, I'm working full time. I don't really know that I'm not traveling very much. So I'm not really posting a lot. And so I think there was also a part of me that was struggling with that pivot from an identity perspective because I think I had spent 5 years building my identity as a travel content creator, as someone who did this full time and worked for myself. And so there were all these key parts of my identity that I felt like, okay, I'm not those things anymore. But will my audience be okay with that? Like, how do I go online and say, like, just kidding. I actually, I have this full time job now and I rented an apartment and I will still travel, but I won't be as traveling as frequently as I once was. So I definitely think that was honestly until probably very recently, it was like really hard for me to figure out like how do I showcase my journey of this is who I was. I have continued to evolve as a person, as everyone does, right? And this is who I am now. And I still feel very passionate about travel and food, but I also am not doing it full time, right? So it's hard because I think one thing that's challenging about every career pivot is like, whether we like it or not, it is a lot of our identity. And I think sometimes there's like that growth discomfort of like, I'm going from this to this. And you kind of mourn. It's very bittersweet. You mourn some of the things that you've left behind and you're excited about some of the things that are to come.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. I don't think a lot of people are comfortable with the in between, the liminal spaces.
Yeah. I think I think one thing that I've had to learn and probably will continue to learn is that like just because you're not seeing the progress happen necessarily doesn't mean that it's not happening, because I think sometimes it feels like, I think people always talk about this with like exercising, right? Like they'll be like, "Oh, you're working out every day. You feel like maybe, you're working towards building muscles, right? And then all of a sudden you can like lift the 20-pound dumbbell instead of the 15-pound one." But the reality is like this didn't happen all of a sudden, right? It's just like there's this in-between period of growth that you're not seeing, because it's not like you're trying to lift a 16 or 17 or 18 in between. You're just going from 15 to 20. And I think your career's kind of like that. So it was like a friend that I had made in 2019, right? So it's like all these things where it's like, oh, if I hadn't gone out of my way to make this like friendship connection way back in the day, if I hadn't learned all these skills from travel blogging, and then if I hadn't like met this other person, right? So it's like all these little domino effects that you can kind of see the connection. So like an outsider might see it and be like, wow, this job just landed in her lap. But the reality is when you can look back and see like all the connective points, you're like, actually 10 things had to line up before I could get here. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. Like you don't always see those like 10 things that are happening, and maybe you can look back on them, but in the moment, you're not seeing them necessarily, right?
Yeah. Preparation meets opportunity.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
People don't see the preparation, they see the opportunity and they're like, oh, that's how it happened.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Interesting. This is such a good session together. I wonder what success looked like for Sally in her 20s and what success looks like for Sally in her 30s.
I think that success in my 20s was probably the traditional way of thinking about success, which was very much rooted in my career, right? I think for me in my 20s, or at least in my earlier 20s when I was finishing college, like I was always like, get good grades in high school, go to a great college, graduate, get an amazing job, live happily ever after, right? And I think that what I've really learned in the period of my travels, but also up till now, is that I think success is really like living a joyful life. I really don't think a singular thing defines success, right? Like, I don't think success is defined by my job or by the house I live in or my salary. But I really think it's like, I ask myself, like, am I living in accordance with the values that I care about, right? And for me, some of those things are like, trying new things. It's like spending time with loved ones, right? It's pursuing creative projects. I think that there's important to be as like a regular part of my life, not a rare part of my life. So that's really how I define success.
Yeah, I think I felt similarly in that in my 20s, I judged my life based on peak experiences and peak moments. And I
Hmm.
think now I judge it based on the day to day.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's like, I think travel was to some extent also, I mean, it was many things for me, but it was also an escapism, right? I think it was like, I was like, oh, I don't love the life that I'm maybe necessarily living when I'm at home. And so, but every time I'm traveling, I'm getting these like amazing experiences. And so then I was always like chasing that. But I think like what you're saying now is that so much, I think of your 30s, you start to realize like, actually, I want to live a joyful life day to day. But I think as I got older, I was like, I really want to be there for my friends during their big moments, their little moments, like to the extent that I can, right? Like everyone is busy. I get that. I'm also busy, but it's so important for me to support my family, my loved ones, my partner, right? And I get that same support from them. And to me, that is like one of the things that honestly brings me the most joy in my life, truly.
Aw, I'm so lucky to have you in my life too. And
Yeah.
yeah, as cheesy as it sounds, I do think there's importance in finding joy in the everyday. And it's harder than what a lot of people think it is. So
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that. But yeah, I would say, there's a lot of people out there that are asking themselves, what comes after, right? What comes after work? What comes after I do this? Any wisdom, any words of encouragement, anything that comes to mind for you?
I heard someone say that people live the lives that they have the courage to imagine for themselves, right? So it's really not just, oh, this is the life I want, or this is the life that I dream of, right? I deserve a great partner. I deserve a job that brings me work life balance. I have this courage to imagine that my life can be the life that I want to live. When I think about what's next, it's really you have to imagine it for yourself, and you have to work towards it, and you have to be okay that like it might not follow the plan that you set out, right? But it'll get there. It might not be like the dream job that you had, but maybe it's one step closer. Maybe it's a job that isn't your dream, but is giving you the space and opportunity to explore some more of what your dream is, or like of what your hobbies are, or other things, right? So I do think that there is kind of beauty in uncertainty, and also that courage is arguably more important than dreaming.
Yeah, I think you're defining courage as the ability to dream, but also to plan out what you want
Yeah.
to do and go after it.
Yeah, because I think that unfortunately, a lot of what holds us back is ourselves. Like we tell each other, or we tell ourselves no before someone else can tell us no. And so I think part of courage is also like being like, yeah, I might not have the skill set, but I'm going to try anyway. But as adults, we don't spend a lot of our lives anymore being bad at things, because we tend to gravitate towards doing the things that we are good at, right? So it is a leap of courage to be like, I'm going to learn this skill, and I'm probably going to be bad at it. And I have to be okay with the discomfort of being bad at it, because I know this is going to take me towards the dream that I'm looking for, right? So it's kind of like that, where it's like you said, courage is very much, it's like courage through the lens of dreaming, or dreaming through the lens of courage, whichever way you look at it.
Yeah. Aw, well, thanks for joining, Sally. I really appreciate this talk and hope you enjoyed the session too. It's always nice to kind of hear it and have you walk down the memory lane.
Yeah, no, I really did. Thank you so much for having me. I really hope this is something that's helpful for someone else who's feeling a little stuck or in the middle of a career pivot, because I think, it really does all work out in the end. And even if it's not the way that you imagined it, I think it's often for the better. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.